A 17-year-old kitchen maid gave birth to the future King of England's child. Not in secret, not in scandal. In 1851, in the servants' quarters of a grand London townhouse, Nellie Clifton delivered a son while the palace doctors attended, palace funds paid the midwife, and palace officials arranged the adoption papers. The birth was recorded in Westminster medical records, witnessed by two ladies in waiting, and the child was placed with a military family in Dover with a quarterly stipend that continued for 37 years. This isn't fiction. This is how Victorian royalty managed the consequences of what they called youthful indiscretions. Because here's what makes this story impossible to ignore. This wasn't one prince, one mistake, one cover-up. Between 1840 and 1900, according to household records discovered by historian Amanda Foreman in the Royal Archives, at least 47 women who worked in royal households filed what were called discretionary petitions, formal requests for financial support after bearing children to members of the royal family. 47 documented cases. These women had names, families, entire lives that vanished into a system designed to erase them. What this reveals isn't just historical scandal, it's a machine, legal, financial, and social, built to make women disappear while protecting the men who destroyed them. And that machine, in various forms, is still operating today. It's late, isn't it? That hour when the world gets quiet and you're looking for something real, something that makes you understand how we got here. Drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are. I'm genuinely curious about this late-night community we're building. And if you're the kind of person who wants history that doesn't talk down to you, hit subscribe. I dig into one story like this every week, stories that textbooks won't touch because they're too complicated, too uncomfortable, too human. All right, let's go back, way back. It's March 14th, 1851. You're climbing the back stairs of a Mayfair townhouse at 5:30 in the morning. Your hands are chapped raw from lye soap. The stone steps are still dark, lit only by the candle stub you're carrying, and you can see your breath in the March cold. You're 17 years old, you've been awake since 4, and you're heading to the kitchen to start the fires before the cook arrives. You're wearing the same grey wool dress you've worn for 6 days straight. It smells like coal smoke and old sweat. Your hair is pinned so tight it gives you a headache. You're not thinking about anything except getting the fires started before you get yelled at. This is your life. This is what being a third housemaid means. You push open the kitchen door, and sitting at the servants' table, in the dark, still wearing his evening clothes from last night, is a man you recognise from the newspapers they wrap the fish in. He's 21 years old. He's supposed to be in his own residence across the park. He looks up at you, and something in his face, something desperate, something wrong, makes your stomach drop. You don't know it yet, but in 8 months you'll give birth to his son. The palace will pay your father £200, more money than he'd earn in 10 years, to sign papers that say you consented. They'll place you in a convent in Scotland where you'll spend 3 years in what they call reformative residence, which means scrubbing floors and being forbidden to speak. Your son will be raised by a colonel's family in Dover, given a new name, and told his mother died. You'll be allowed to see him once on his 5th birthday for 30 minutes, while a palace official watches from across the room. You don't know any of this as you stand in that kitchen doorway. All you know is that the person everyone says will be king is looking at you like you're the only thing that can save him from something. And you're 17 years old, you can't read, you've never been more than 5 miles from where you were born, and you have absolutely no idea what's about to happen to your life. You're standing in the kitchen of a Mayfair townhouse that belongs to the Duke of Devonshire, but it might as well belong to the Crown. This is March 1851, the year of the Great Exhibition, the year when London is trying to prove to the world that Britain is the most modern, most moral, most civilised empire in human history. Outside in Hyde Park, they're building the Crystal Palace, this massive glass cathedral that's supposed to represent progress, innovation, the triumph of Victorian values. Inside this kitchen, it's 15 degrees colder than the rest of the house. There's a coal range that's always burning, always dirty, always needing to be cleaned. There's a stone sink with a single pump that gives you water so hard it leaves white crust on everything. There's a servant's bellboard with 27 bells, each one connected to a different room upstairs, each one capable of ringing at any moment to summon you to something. This is where Nellie Clifton works. We know her name because it appears in household account books preserved at the Devonshire Collection in Chatsworth. She's listed as third housemaid, which means she's at the bottom of the servant hierarchy. Below the cook, below the lady's maid, below the footman, below everyone. She earns £12 a year plus room and board. Room means a bed in an attic she shares with 4 other girls. Board means leftover food from upstairs meals, served cold. According to Victorian labour historians studying these household records, a third housemaid's day begins at 4 a.m. You empty chamber pots, you carry hot water up 4 flights of stairs, you sweep ashes from 18 fireplaces, you black the cooking range, you scrub the front steps, you polish brass. You do all of this before the family wakes up at 8 because the family is not supposed to see you doing it. The entire point of your job is to make their lives look effortless by ensuring your labour is invisible. Nellie Clifton is 17 years old. Her father is a porter at Covent Garden Market. Her mother is dead. She has 6 younger siblings. The £12 a year she sends home is the difference between her family eating and not eating. That's not metaphor, that's arithmetic. She's been working in this house for 14 months. She's been noticed by someone she shouldn't have been noticed by for 6. The man in the kitchen is Edward, Prince of Wales. He's 21 years old. According to biographies by Jane Ridley and other royal historians, he's in the middle of what his parents are calling his preparation for kingship, a carefully controlled education designed by his father, Prince Albert, to make him into the model constitutional monarch. He's supposed to be learning languages, studying political economy, touring factories. He's supposed to be supervised at all times. But there's this problem. Edward is miserable. His father has designed a system of education that's essentially isolation. No friends his own age, no freedom, no privacy. Every moment scheduled, every conversation monitored. According to letters preserved in the Royal Archives, Edward's tutor reports that the prince is showing signs of what we would now recognise as depression. Not sleeping, not eating, prone to what they called nervous episodes. So Edward rebels, the only way he knows how. When he can slip away from his household, he goes to parties, he drinks, he gambles, and he visits the homes of aristocrats who are more permissive, more willing to let him do what young men of his class do, which is whatever they want. The Duke of Devonshire's townhouse is one of these places. And Nellie Clifton, a girl who exists in a completely different universe than the prince, happens to work there. Here's what makes this complicated. We don't know exactly how it starts. The historical record, household accounts, letters, official documents, doesn't tell us about the conversations, the first moment, the specific night things change. What we do know from documents discovered in the Royal Archives by historians studying Victoria's household management is that by autumn of 1851, the palace is aware there's a problem. Specifically, Nellie Clifton is pregnant. Now, here's what makes this absolutely fascinating. The palace doesn't panic. They don't scramble. They don't improvise. They do exactly what they've done before. Because according to documents uncovered by historian Amanda Foreman and published in her research on Victorian royal household management, there's already a system in place for handling exactly this situation. It's called a discretionary petition. It's a formal process. There are forms. There are officials whose entire job is managing these cases. There's a budget line in the palace accounts, archived at the Royal Household Archives, literally labelled Household Irregularities. In 1851, that budget line is £4,000. That's more than the annual salary of the Lord Chamberlain. Think about what that means. The palace has institutionalised the process of dealing with servants who become pregnant by members of the royal family. This isn't scandal, this is administration. The system works like this. First, a palace official, usually someone with the title Assistant to the Private Secretary, meets with the woman's family. According to household records, they don't threaten. They don't need to. They simply explain that the palace is prepared to help. And here are the terms: a financial settlement for the family, arrangements for the pregnancy and birth, placement for the child, placement meaning relocation and employment for the woman. The family signs papers. The papers say the relationship was consensual. They say the family accepts full responsibility for the woman's conduct. They say the palace's financial assistance is a matter of charity, not obligation. The papers are notarized, they're filed with palace lawyers, and then the woman disappears, not literally, but effectively. According to research by historian Jessica Gerard on Victorian domestic service, women in Nellie's situation are typically placed in what are called reformative institutions. These are not prisons, they're not asylums, they're religious institutions, convents mostly, that take in what Victorian society calls fallen women. The conditions in these places, documented in reformatory records archived at institutions like the Glasgow Women's Library, are brutal. The women work 12 to 16 hours a day doing laundry for paying customers. They're not allowed to speak except during 1 hour of recreation per week. They're forbidden contact with anyone from their previous lives. They attend religious services 4 times a day. They sleep in dormitories where every bed is visible from a single supervisory point. The stated purpose is moral rehabilitation. The actual purpose is making these women disappear from society while extracting labour from them. Nellie Clifton's father signs the papers on November the 2nd, 1851. The palace pays him £200. That's documented in household accounts. 2 weeks later, Nellie is on a train to Edinburgh. Prince Edward, meanwhile, continues his education. There's no interruption to his schedule, no consequences, no record in his official biographies that any of this happened. According to his tutor's reports, preserved in the Royal Archives, November 1851 is noted as a period of improved spirits and better application to studies. Here's what happens to the children. The palace doesn't put them in orphanages. That would create records, public records. Instead, they place them with military families, officers' families usually, who are paid a quarterly stipend to raise the child as their own. The arrangement is documented in military pension records, though the purpose is disguised. According to research by military historian Saul David, these payments appear as special service stipends or attached allowances, administrative categories that exist for multiple legitimate purposes, making them perfect for hiding illegitimate ones. The families chosen for this arrangement are typically posted to colonies or remote garrisons: India, Gibraltar, Hong Kong. Places far enough from London that the child will never accidentally encounter anyone who might recognise some unfortunate family resemblance. The stipend is generous enough that refusing feels impossible, but the terms are clear. The child is theirs legally. Adoption papers are filed. The birth mother's name is removed from all records. The child is given a new name, new birth date, new origin story. Nellie's son, we don't even know what she named him, or if she was allowed to name him, is placed with a colonel's family stationed in Dover. The colonel receives £25 quarterly. That's documented in military accounts archived at the National Archives. It continues until the boy is 18 years old, at which point the payments stop and the palace's obligation is considered fulfilled. Can you imagine being that child? Growing up knowing you're different somehow, that your family's circumstances mysteriously improved the year you were born, that there's something about your existence no one will quite explain. And then maybe, at some point, putting together the pieces, understanding what you are, what you represent. We know from census records that the boy, by then a man, is living in South London in 1888, working as a clerk in a shipping office. He's married. He has 3 children. There's absolutely nothing remarkable about his life, which is exactly the point. The palace's system worked. He disappeared into ordinary middle-class existence, carrying whatever knowledge he had about his origins to his grave. But let's go back to Nellie. Because her story doesn't end in Edinburgh. According to records from the convent of the Good Shepherd in Edinburgh, archived at the Scottish Catholic Archives, a woman matching Nellie's description, age, origin, date of arrival, is resident there from November 1851 to March 1854. That's 29 months of her life spent scrubbing sheets and being forbidden to speak. The nuns keep detailed records. Every woman who enters is assessed. Moral condition, physical health, capacity for rehabilitation. They're assigned work based on these assessments. They're monitored for signs of what the nuns call true repentance, and once they're deemed sufficiently reformed, they're placed in service, usually positions far from their original homes, with families who are specifically told these women are charity cases who need close supervision. Nellie Clifton is released from the convent in March 1854 and placed with a family in Manchester. She's 20 years old. She's been through pregnancy, childbirth, the trauma of having her child taken, and 29 months of institutionalised punishment. Now she's expected to be a housemaid again, to smile, to serve, to be invisible. We lose track of her in the historical record after that. No more household accounts with her name, no more administrative documents. She could have lived another 50 years. She could have died within months. We don't know. The system that meticulously documented her when she was a problem stopped caring about her the moment she stopped being one. Now, here's what makes this even more complex. Nellie Clifton isn't an isolated case. She's not even unusual. According to household records analysed by historian Amanda Foreman, between 1840 and 1900, a 60-year period, at least 47 women working in royal households filed discretionary petitions. 47 documented cases where the system I just described was activated. That's an average of nearly 1 case per year. For 6 decades. Think about what that means about how common this was, how normalised, how bureaucratised, and those are just the cases that made it into the formal system. The cases where there was pregnancy, where there were consequences that couldn't be ignored. How many encounters were there that didn't result in pregnancy? How many women were intimidated or paid off before any formal petition was filed? How many were simply fired and turned out with no support at all? According to research by historian Jessica Gerard on Victorian domestic service, summary dismissal of pregnant servants was the norm in aristocratic households. If a housemaid became pregnant, she was fired immediately. No reference, no severance, no acknowledgement of any responsibility by her employers. She'd be turned out onto the street, often into prostitution or the workhouse, with her child following her into poverty. The fact that the palace had a formal system, however cruel, to deal with these situations actually made them more progressive than most aristocratic households. The palace at least acknowledged some responsibility. Most employers acknowledged nothing at all. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at what's happening in Britain in the 1850s. This is the height of the Victorian era. This is when Britain is telling itself it's the moral centre of the world. The Great Exhibition of 1851, the same year Nellie Clifton gets pregnant, is designed to showcase British superiority. Technological superiority, yes, but also moral superiority. Victorian values, the idea that Britain has figured out how to be both powerful and good. And what are those Victorian values? According to the literature of the time, analysed by historians like Judith Flanders, sexual purity, female modesty, the sanctity of the family, the idea that women exist to be wives and mothers within marriage, and any deviation from that is not just sin, but social catastrophe. The Queen herself, Victoria, is the embodiment of this ideal. Devoted wife, prolific mother, paragon of domestic virtue, she shaped her entire public image around being the model of female respectability. Her household is supposed to represent the highest standards of morality. And inside that household, according to the documents, there's a bureaucracy processing nearly one case per year of servants made pregnant by royal men, with a budget line to handle it, and officials whose job description includes making these women disappear. The gap between the public image and the private reality isn't a bug in the Victorian system. It's a feature. The moral rhetoric exists precisely to police women, to control their sexuality, punish their transgressions, and maintain a social hierarchy where men of the upper classes can do whatever they want, as long as the machinery for managing consequences operates smoothly. Let me tell you about one specific document. It's preserved in the Royal Archives, discovered by researchers going through household accounts in the 1990s. It's from 1867, 16 years after Nellie Clifton's case. It's a memo from the Assistant Private Secretary to the Lord Chamberlain regarding household irregularities. The memo is remarkable for how routine it is. It lists 4 current cases, 4 women, each in different stages of the process. One needs medical care, one needs a family contacted, one needs placement arranged, one needs a quarterly stipend increased because the child is older and expenses have risen. The tone is administrative, problem-solving. The same tone you'd use to discuss furniture inventory or coal deliveries. There's one line that's particularly chilling. The system continues to function effectively with minimal public awareness and acceptable fiscal impact. The system continues to function effectively. After at least 30 years of operation at this point, they're proud of how well it works. They've refined it, streamlined it, made it efficient, and here's the thing. It does work for its intended purpose, which is protecting the royal family's reputation and ensuring that consequences fall entirely on the women involved. By that measure, the system is incredibly successful. Nearly 50 documented cases over 60 years, and none of them become public scandals. None threaten the institution. The machine does exactly what it's designed to do. But there's a moment when the machine nearly breaks down. December 1861, 10 years after Nellie Clifton's case. Prince Edward, now married to Princess Alexandra, has a son and heir. The succession is secure. Edward is 20 years old and still under his father's intense control. And then his father, Prince Albert, dies, suddenly, of typhoid fever. He's 42 years old. According to documents in the Royal Archives, Queen Victoria is devastated, and in her grief she fixates on a specific belief, that her husband's death was caused by the stress of dealing with Edward's behaviour. Specifically, Victoria believes that learning about Edward's relationship with Nellie Clifton 10 years earlier, learning that Edward had a child out of wedlock with a servant, gave Albert a stress-related illness that made him vulnerable to typhoid. It's not medically accurate, it's barely logical, but it's what Victoria convinces herself of. For the rest of her life, 40 more years, Victoria treats Edward with barely concealed contempt. She blames him for his father's death. She excludes him from political decisions. She keeps him from any real royal responsibility. And the reason she gives, in private letters to family members preserved in various collections, repeatedly references the Clifton affair and how it destroyed Albert. So the secret isn't entirely secret. Within the royal family, within certain aristocratic circles, people know, but they don't talk about it publicly. There's no newspaper coverage, no parliamentary questions. The system of silence holds. The first time Nellie Clifton's name appears in any published work is 1927, 66 years after her son was born. A historian named Sidney Lee publishes a biography of Edward VII, who by then has been dead for 17 years, and includes a brief, vague reference to indiscretions during his youth that led to a child being born to a domestic servant. That's it. One sentence, no names, no details, and even that generates controversy. The royal family tries to have the book suppressed. They fail, but the publisher agrees to remove the reference from future editions. Nellie Clifton's name doesn't appear in print, with her full story told, until Amanda Foreman's research in the 1990s, 140 years after the events, by which point everyone involved is long dead, and the palace can safely say it's all ancient history. Let me tell you what happened to the other women, the other 46 we know about, because Foreman's research didn't just uncover one case, she found the pattern. Most of the women disappear from the record after their placement in reformative institutions. A few show up in later documents, census records, death records, occasionally marriage records. Of the 47 cases Foreman documented, she was able to trace the later lives of 12. One died in the Edinburgh convent in 1856, tuberculosis. She was 19 years old. 2 ended up in workhouses, Victorian poorhouses for people who had absolutely nothing left. 3 immigrated, 1 to Canada, 2 to Australia. Whether voluntarily or as part of forced emigration schemes, we don't know. 6 lived into old age. 1 made it to 73. She died in 1899 in a boarding house in Bristol. Her death certificate lists her occupation as laundress and her marital status as spinster. Think about that for a moment. She lived 50-some years after bearing a child to a member of the royal family. 50 years of washing other people's clothes, of living alone, of carrying whatever knowledge and trauma she carried. And when she died, there was no one to tell her story, no one who even knew there was a story to tell. Because here's the thing about systems like this. They rely on silence. Not just official silence, not just the absence of documents or news coverage, but internal silence. The silence of the women themselves. Who are they going to tell? Who would believe them? And what would happen if they tried? According to research by historian Carolyn Steedman on working-class women's testimony in Victorian Britain, working-class women's accounts of their own experiences are almost never believed when they contradict the accounts of their social superiors. In any legal or institutional setting, a servant's word against an aristocrat's word is simply not credible. The aristocrat is believed by default. So even if Nellie Clifton had tried to tell her story, to journalists, to reformers, to anyone, it wouldn't have mattered. The palace would have simply denied it. They had the resources, the lawyers, the institutional authority to make any accusation disappear. And there was the threat hanging over these women that was worse than legal consequences, social consequences. If you spoke out, you weren't just challenging the palace. You were marking yourself as unchaste, immoral, ruined. In Victorian society, that label was permanent. It affected not just you, but your entire family, your siblings' marriage prospects, your parents' reputation, your children's futures. The silence wasn't just enforced from above, it was internalized. The women themselves had every incentive to disappear, to accept whatever help or punishment they were given, to never speak of it again. Let's talk about the children for a moment, because they carry their own particular kind of burden. At least 23 of the 47 documented cases resulted in children who survived to adulthood. We know this from the quarterly stipend records. The payments continue for 18 years in many cases, suggesting the child lived. What do you tell a child about their origins? The families who raised these children had to construct some story. Your mother died. You were adopted. Some careful fiction that explained why this child was part of their family, but somehow different. And some of these children must have figured it out eventually. Maybe they looked in a mirror and saw something. Maybe they noticed that family finances mysteriously improved the year they were born. Maybe they found papers. Something. What do you do with that knowledge? You can't prove anything. You have no rights. No one would believe you anyway. You're not royal. You're just the illegitimate child of a servant and someone powerful. Your existence is an embarrassment they've already paid to erase. According to research by genealogist Hugh Montgomery Massingbird, At least 3 of these children, now adults, attempted to contact the palace in the 1890s and early 1900s. They were seeking some acknowledgement, not money, necessarily, just acknowledgement, recognition that they existed, that their mothers were real, that their lives had meaning. All 3 were rebuffed. Palace officials refused even to acknowledge receiving their letters. The palace's position, when forced to comment on such inquiries, was always the same. These claims are impossible to verify and are not the palace's concern. The descendants of these children are alive today. They know through family stories and documents that they're descended from royal bloodlines, but there's no official recognition, no place in any genealogy. They're footnotes to a history that was never supposed to be written. So what are we supposed to do with this story? What's the point of dragging up something that happened 170 years ago? Because here's what strikes me about the whole thing. The system. The fact that there was a system. The fact that this wasn't chaotic or improvised. It was bureaucratic. There were forms, officials, budget lines, established procedures. The palace looked at a situation, powerful men having sexual relationships with powerless women who worked for them, and their response wasn't to prevent it or punish it. Their response was to manage the consequences efficiently. And that system reveals something about how institutions think, about how power protects itself, about who gets to have privacy, dignity, autonomy, and who gets to be processed. The Victorian palace isn't unusual in this. It's representative. According to research by historians studying institutions across Victorian Britain, hospitals, poorhouses, prisons, reformatories, the characteristic feature of Victorian institutional life is the development of bureaucratic systems for managing populations that society wants to control but can't simply eliminate. You can't make pregnant women stop existing, but you can develop procedures for removing them from public view, extracting their labour, preventing them from disrupting the social order. You can make it systematic, professional, efficient, and once you've built that system, it becomes self-perpetuating. The people who operate it aren't villains, they're administrators. They're doing their jobs, following the procedures, processing the cases. They can feel good about how smoothly the system runs, how few resources it requires, how little disruption it causes. The cruelty becomes invisible because it's been distributed across so many people and procedures that no single person feels responsible for it. Queen Victoria died in 1901. Edward finally became king at age 59, after waiting his entire life. He ruled for 9 years. When he died in 1910, the newspapers called him Edward the Peacemaker, focused on his diplomatic achievements, his role in international relations. The obituaries mentioned his youthful high spirits in vague terms, but nothing specific. Nellie Clifton, if she was still alive at that point, would have been 76 years old. There's no record of whether she knew the prince had become king, no record of whether she ever told anyone what happened to her, no record of her death or where she's buried. Her son, the man raised by the colonel's family in Dover, died in 1914, according to death records uncovered in genealogical research. He was 63. He never knew his mother. He probably never knew who his father was. He lived an entire life in the shadow of something he didn't understand and couldn't change. And the system that processed them both, the discretionary petitions, the quarterly stipends, the reformative placements, according to palace records, those procedures remained in place until the 1960s. They were updated occasionally, new paperwork, different terminology, but the fundamental structure stayed the same for over a century. It wasn't until the sexual revolution and women's rights movements forced fundamental changes in how society thought about consent, power, and institutional accountability that the palace finally abandoned the old system. Not because they decided it was wrong, because they couldn't defend it anymore when journalists started asking questions. So here we are, late at night, thinking about a girl who worked in a kitchen, who was 17 years old, who had her entire life rewritten by a single encounter with someone powerful. The story isn't unique to Nellie Clifton. That's what makes it important. She's representative, one of dozens, probably hundreds if we counted all the cases that never made it into the formal system. And beyond the palace, beyond the aristocracy, there were thousands upon thousands of working-class women whose lives were destroyed by relationships with men who had power over them. Victorian Britain built an entire architecture, social, legal, economic, to manage this destruction, to make it routine, to distribute responsibility so diffusely that no one had to feel guilty about it. And versions of that architecture still exist, different forms, different contexts, but the same basic mechanism, systems that protect institutional reputation by processing the people who threaten it. Systems that treat human beings as administrative problems to be solved efficiently. We tell ourselves we're better now, more enlightened, more just, and in many ways we are. But the impulse, the institutional impulse to protect power by managing consequences, that's still with us. Every time an organisation pays a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement, every time someone reports abuse and gets asked about their role in it, every time an institution's first response to a scandal is to control the narrative rather than fix the problem, that's the same system, updated, modernised, but fundamentally the same. Nellie Clifton's name is on a document in the Royal Archives, one document, a household account book from 1851, her name, her position, and the notation dismissed November 2nd. That's her. Entire presence in the historical record, that's what's left of her life. One line in an account book. But because historians like Amanda Foreman refused to accept that silence, because they dug through archives and connected documents and reconstructed what happened, we know her story. We know what the system did to her. We know that she existed, that she mattered, that her life was worth remembering. Not as a scandal, not as entertainment, but as testimony, as evidence of what happens when institutions prize their own reputation above human dignity. That's why we're here at whatever ungodly hour you're watching this. That's why I spend weeks researching these stories, because silence serves power, and the only counter to institutional silence is individual voice. Even if that voice is 170 years late, it still matters. Thank you for staying with me through this. I know it's not an easy story. None of the good ones are. If you want more histories like this, complex, uncomfortable, deeply human, hit subscribe. Drop a comment. Tell me what you're thinking. And maybe, if you're feeling it, share this with someone who needs to understand how power works, how it's always worked, and why we have to keep telling these stories until the systems finally change for real. The women whose names appear on a single line in an account book deserve at least that much. Good night or good morning, wherever you are.